All right, so my presentation is what's blooming, right? So I am always taking pictures, and so these are just pictures of plants that I've seen blooming around this time. So obviously, rain lily is a really great plant right after a rain if we have a typical rainy spring season. And so in the top listing, sometimes I'm going to call them different things. iNaturalist has really confused me because I, used to just use the flora of North Central Texas as like my Bible for native plants of North Texas. But since iNaturalist has come along and they kind of keep up with the taxonomy and the names, and then they put different common names than what I'm used to in the book, it throws me off. And also, just as a disclaimer, I feel a little bit rusty because I haven't been out in the field too much lately since the growing season started. So the top column is just row is just going to tell you kind of what the Latin name stands for. So the rain lilies, they show up within 24 hours of a rain event. They look like onions, and it's because they're in the Amaryllidaceae family. And the leaves are really good forage for deer. Now, I have seen some people who moved out into a more rural area, and they're on calcareous soil, so like Fort Worth prairie soil, and they were mowing their yards all the time, trying to make like a real nice manicured lawn, and then it would rain, and their lawn is just full of these beautiful rain lilies. And whenever I would drive by, I know, like just seeing those plants, I know right away what kind of soil they have, and that is remnant or relic prairie. So another plant is the breadroot, and that basically the Pediomelum is known. The name comes for plain and apple, and it's really talking about that rootstock, which is like really it's got a really thick, dense root that Native Americans used for food, but it's also good forage for deer and feral hogs. And nobody wants to think about feral hogs going and rooting up our really nice prairie wildflowers, but the reality is it's super yummy and full of energy and carbohydrates for wildlife. So it's a legume, so it's also fixing nitrogen in the soil. And the thing that I think is really interesting about the plant also is that the leaves and the stems are gland dotted. Let's see, go to the next one. So next one is foxglove. So the penstemon is a Greek word meaning penta, or penta is the root of it, which means 5, and stamen meaning stamen. And cobea is named after a Spanish missionary and naturalist from the 1600s. So again, 5 stamens, 4 of them are fertile, and then 1 is sterile. It's also called beard tongue because of the sterile stamen has a tuft of hair, which you can kind of see in the picture. Bumblebees really, 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 really love foxglove. Well, I can't say, I don't know if they love, like technically love, but they visit foxglove, and the evolutionary connection between the shape of the flower and the size of the bumblebee's body is perfect. The bees just kind of wiggle their way in, and then they're collecting the pollen even without thinking about it. It's also attracting many other species of pollinators and moths. It's super showy, and it has a high nitrogen content. Let's see, move that over there. It is poisonous, but oddly enough, it's the chemical that's extracted from it is used for heart medicine. And the white milkwort, which is Polygala alba. I love that name. It just seems like it rolls off the tongue. But poly means many or much, and gala meaning milk, and then alba means white. And so these are dainty little flowers. I haven't seen maybe just a few of them blooming yet, but I think everything's kind of thrown off right now. And Suzanne and Kate can probably attest to this better, but it seems like a lot of things were just a little bit later than normal because of the freeze. So set back maybe a little bit, at least in North Texas. So the milkwort is supposed to increase milk production in lactating mothers, and the roots could be used for aching ears by the Sioux, or were used by the Sioux for earaches. I can't say that I've seen turkey, deer, and livestock eating this, but I've read that it is good forage for all of them. And then they're growing on limestone soil. So a lot of the times where I'm finding them, it's not really barren soils, but it's definitely, you know, that calcareous soil and kind of sparse vegetation is where I find them. So this is definitely starting to bloom, I think, more in the last week or so, is the Engelmann daisy. And it's named after the German botanist from the 1800s. And the Paristo means odd number, and tinea is ribbon. So I'm not quite sure where the ribbon part comes from, if it's talking about the leaves, or I don't really see ribbon in here, but someone in the audience might know. It's definitely one of the big four native perennials. So Maximilian sunflower, bush sunflower, and Illinois bundleflower. That's probably more coming from, you know, the Midwest and the tall grass prairie, that these are big, you know, important sunflowers of the tall grass prairie. And so I have read that the crude protein is up to 20%, which is super important if you're talking about grazers. So livestock really love it, but thinking historically, bison, perhaps antelope might have eaten it, deer would eat it. So they know, I guess, intuitively or instinctively, that protein is something that they need and the content's high. So it's known as like the ice cream plant. I think Ricky Linux had talked about that in one of his presentations. And it might even say it in his book, I'm not sure. But basically it is like ice cream, the way we think of Bluebell ice cream. And well, if you're Texan anyways, if you're a true Texan, Bluebell ice cream, you're going to want to go straight for it. And it's really delicious and it gives you a lot of energy. Well, cattle, when there's a pasture with that, they're eating it because they know that the protein content's high, and then they'll graze it out of a pasture. Conversely, if you reduce the stocking rate and you start seeing Engelmann daisy coming up, then that, you know, you've reduced the grazing pressure. So that's kind of telling you, well, they were eating it, but now I've reduced the number. So it's rebounding. And then the seeds are eaten by birds. So the Verlander sundrop, that is calx for the cup and lophus for crest on the flower. And then Berlandii is for the French botanist and explorer. So this, I always get super, super, super excited whenever I see sun drops. I mean, really excited. I don't know why. I think because, well, they're like sun. They're like a burst of bright yellow color. Now deer and livestock would eat it, and so I'm assuming that bison probably would eat it, although I haven't witnessed it in person. Bison tend to be more, definitely, I think, more grass grazers than livestock. Livestock tend to mostly eat grass, but they kind of pick around and eat some forbs as well. And so you're not seeing these again in heavily grazed pastures. So if you remove or reduce your grazing numbers and that intensity, then if you had these, they may appear again. They're opening near sunrise, and their fruit capsule is 4-chambered. So everybody probably knows this one. This is a super popular plant, as milkweed, and we all probably know that monarchs love antelope horn. It's their #1 milkweed that they're using as a host plant. So it's named, Asclepius is named after the Greek god Asclepios, which this is alluding to medicinal properties, and then asperula is meaning rough. So it's a rich nectar source, and you can tell that by the bazillion pollinators that you see on antelope horn and some other milkweeds. And whenever the seed matures and cracks open, it desiccates and it opens up, then the seeds are attached to this little fluff, and then that fluff kind of blows in the wind, and it's almost, I don't know, ethereal to see milkweed seeds blowing in the wind. And that fluff can be used by birds to make nests. Also the fluff was used in the past to make candle wicks. Now it is forage for deer and livestock. And that's why in overgrazed pastures, you may see a lot of milkweed. And so for people who are, really interested in monarch and other pollinator conservation, then you'll get really excited when you see milkweed all over the place. And that is a good thing. It's just that maybe sometimes it's an indicator of an overgrazed area. And so within cities, I work for a municipality. So within cities, we have a lot of push for monarch host plants, plant pollinator gardens, landscape at your home, use milkweed. But which we do need that, but I always say, well, if you just go a little bit outside of town, you can probably find a lot of milkweed on properties that have cattle, because everything tends to get overgrazed in Texas. So that's to the benefit of monarchs in some cases. The name antelope horn comes from the curved fruit that kind of makes you think of an antelope horn. It's growing in mostly rocky calcareous soils. I don't always see it or often see it on sandy soils. And if I did see it on sandy soils, then usually it's kind of probably where limestone is precipitating through the soil through runoff. Again, it's poisonous. Although I was just reading out of this book, which is an awesome book. Let's see. Medicinal Wild Plants of the Prairie. It was talking about how Native American tribes would actually use milkweed to induce better milk production in women, which I'm wondering, how did they get it to the point where it was not poisonous for the woman to ingest? The monarch actually feeds on the milkweed, and that's one of the reasons that bright color indicates to a potential predator, like, maybe you don't want to eat this monarch because it contains something that tastes really icky, which are the glycosides. But that's evolution for you. I have never had contact dermatitis from milkweed, but I suppose some people could have it. These are just a couple of pollinators that I saw on milkweed that I happen to get a good picture of. So carpenter bee, we think of carpenter bees as, they're drilling the holes in your eaves, or, you finish a deck or something and here come the carpenter bees. But they are a pollinator also, and they're not just drilling holes in your house or whatever. They're partaking and feeding off of the milkweeds. And then I really like this exposed bird dropping moth because it's got such an awesome name and it looks like bird droppings. Another milkweed is the green milkweed. And so that actually, I probably see just as many monarchs, and the monarch caterpillars that I've found, I'm finding them more on the green milkweed, but that's probably just because I have more green milkweed than I have antelope horn. The antelope horn is supposed to have the highest amount of the chemical, the glycoside, and that's why the monarchs seem to favor the antelope horn. But I'm pretty sure they're going to take whatever they can get where they are. And what was it, last year or I'm trying to remember, last year or the year before, I live out in Wise County, and I looked up, this was in the fall, and I saw like a monarch flutter by, and then I looked up, and then I just counted as long as I could, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monarchs. I forget what number I got up to. It was probably like 800 or something. So that, I don't know, that's anecdotal, doesn't mean anything, but it is important that we not just have milkweed for them to have as their host plant, but you also want to have a diversity of other wildflowers, because once they emerge as a butterfly and when they're migrating, they need something. They need, especially fall wildflowers, to help fuel their migration. And they're not just looking only for milkweeds. So on the butterfly milkweed, that is appropriately named. Lots of butterflies are on it, just like the other milkweeds, but the butterfly milkweed tends to have, I don't know, I just feel like I see more pollinators on it, more little butterflies like checkers and stuff, checkered skippers. Fair forage for deer. Again, I don't know if I can't think that I've seen a deer eat it, but they might.
Butterfly milkweed is supposed to have less of the glycoside, or less, so they don't like it as much. I have some butterfly milkweed and I've never seen anything on it, although they will use it.
Yeah, it definitely is supposed to have less. So that's why you don't, I guess, if you were looking for monarch caterpillars, you may not find a bunch of them on that, but you would find more of them on antelope horn. But once the flowers are blooming, it's just like a magnet. So, and it's probably the way the hoods are on the, on the different milkweeds, may be more attractive and easily accessible for certain pollinators, depending on whether it has horns or no horns on the flower. And of course, it's producing a lot of nectar, so maybe a lot more nectar than the other milkweeds. And it doesn't have that milky latex. And this is only growing in sandy soil. So here are a couple other, other milkweeds. So the clasping, which is in sandy soil, and the leaves are clasping. I can't see my writing up there. Two-flowered milk vine, which I couldn't find Metallia, what that means. Maybe it's somebody's name. I was unable to find the derivative of that. And then biflora means two-flowered. And so, I put on here under the two-flowered milk vine, Erin Taylor is a naturalist, and she used to work at Brit and at Leela, and she was doing this blog. I'm not sure. I think she's done a couple of blogs lately, but the Happy Naturalist blog. So I put it there because that was when that was like around, in 2014, I think after the State of the Prairie conference. and she wrote this really cute entry, because a blog entry about the milk vine. Yeah, so I will leave it for y'all to read. Excuse me. Spiderwort. There's a couple of different species. I think maybe 4 species of spiderwort that you can find up in north central Texas. The this Ohioensis spiderwort is not super hairy, and I found that I have 2 of them. So one is in my yard that someone gave me years ago. She gave me like 3 of them. And they take over in the early spring or late winter, and they start blooming. So my yard is like full of this purple color. Well, so then I would move it around my yard so that my entire yard is like an explosion of purple. Well, I found this other spiderwort, I'm gonna say on the side of the road. So I salvaged 1 or 2 of them and put them in my yard, but then only to find out that I have it somewhere else on my property anyways. I didn't even know it. But the name is, the common name is spiderwort, and that's because, well, the leaves, but to me, instead of the leaves hanging and reminding me of spider, it really, to me, is more like the roots, because they're like tubular and rubbery. They're slimy. And if you were to pull one out by the roots, to me, the roots look like the spider. That sap, the stems and the leaves are relished by deer. And probably cattle too, because I don't see it except in places where I don't see cattle. I know that feral hogs love spiderwort because I've witnessed it. They really, because they love like that sap. And then long-tongued bees and bumblebees are important pollinators of it. Excuse me. So the phlox, that's for flame, and pilosa is standing for the long hairs that you find on the phlox, is spreading by rhizomes. And there's some areas that I drive that are rural on farm to market roads. And if people don't mow, some people like to get out even on the right of way and mow it. They scalp it. So they're mowing like a first time anything's growing like 3 inches tall, they're out there mowing. But if they would wait just a little bit, they might see that the entire roadside, especially in this one area I'm talking about, it's just all pink, because this phlox, which doesn't even grow very tall, is all over the place. And if they don't get out and mow it right away, they could have a really beautiful scent-filled roadway to look at for, it seems like it blooms for a month or something. It's easy to grow from seed, but it's also easy to take the rootstocks because it's rhizomatous. It has these long floral tubes so that it's pollinated by long-tongued butterflies and moths. Excuse me, I feel like I'm going to lose my voice. Too much talking. So the Nemastylus, this is a pleat leaf. And we were just talking about this earlier today. It gets its name, Prairie Celestial, because the leaves they're pleated. So they're almost like an accordion. They make a W. So if you were to take scissors and cut the leaf in half, you can look at it, the cross section, and it forms a W. And it's a one-stemmed bulb. So the delphinium, the delphinium is named after the Greek word Delphus. And so it's supposed to look like a dolphin. I don't really see that, but maybe I can see that. It's hard for me to really picture a dolphin, and it's named after Carolina. It has toxins, and it can be poisonous to humans and livestock, but then deer, on the other hand, don't mind it. There's another place that I drive by fairly frequently that, again, if they don't get to mowing their acreage, this is all over the place and it's so beautiful. And so I've noticed that if they don't get around to mowing, then they actually let it grow up. But if they mow too early, then they're never going to give it a chance to grow. And Commissea scylloides, that's named after an Native American plant that resembles that. And so the bulbs are edible. I found this on the side of the highway, and I think that there's some in some city parks in Fort Worth that are natural areas. And they're blooming, but they're pretty much gonna be not blooming here pretty soon. They are long-lived and they have pretty deep entrenched roots. And so our mimosa, this I'm trying to think, it used to be Schrankia, but the Latin name changed to mimosa. And it's a legume, so it's not, I wouldn't really say it's a woody species, but it can be just slightly woody. So being a legume, it is good forage for livestock, and it's an indicator of range conditions. So again, it's decreasing as an area is overgrazed. If you release the grazing pressure, it comes back. The leaves are sensitive, and so probably everyone's touched this one before and watched the leaves kind of close up. And so that's just an adaptation to reduce loss to herbivory. So if an animal's gonna, I guess also, if it's kind of closed up, then that protects it in other ways from the weather, and it kind of minimizes it, so it's harder to see. Let's see. For
Michelle, can I ask you a question while you're stopped slightly?
Yeah.
The Quadra valvis, you have it listed as meaning fragrant wood.
Mm-hmm.
Quad looks an awful lot like 4 in Latin to me.
Yeah. Yes. So it does. It does. I think I got that. I'm trying to remember because I researched a lot of these because I'm curious about the Latin names also. I think I got that from the Flora book. But quad, yes, quad typically does mean 4. So, but it obviously has nothing to do with a flower. And then the 2-leaf senna is named after senna, which is an ancient Arabic name for that genus. And Romeriana is the German geologist and explorer. For some reason, it's not grazed by livestock or deer. I don't know if it has a bad taste or it has low protein. It has really cool seeds, though. I always like to collect the seeds when I worked at the nature center, but you had to get out there quick because they would just dry out so quickly, and then the seeds would just pop and fall to the ground. So it was difficult to get them in time. They're growing on limestone soils and they're buzz pollinated. And then of course the echinacea. So there are several species of that in North Texas. And you have the narrow leaf and you have a couple other ones. There's one I'm blanking out right now that's definitely less common, but it was seen at Tandy Hills and then probably further afield from Dallas Fort Worth. And there are a lot of medicinal uses for the coneflower.
Michelle, it's probably Atrorubens.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually, I don't think I would know how to tell the difference between a couple of them, but the narrow leaf one is, well, the purple one is definitely easier to distinguish from the other ones, but the purple one I think is maybe more kind of east. I can't say that I've seen it in the field like kind of westward or west of I-35. I have to move this around. I can't see what I'm looking at. This bar is in the way. So the Texas prairie parsley means many ribbons, and it refers to the fruit, the tubes and the fruit, and then Texana is named after Texas. Black swallowtail caterpillars are feeding on that, and of course yellow is an attractive color for bees and flies, and is pollinated by little tiny bees and flies, so solitary bees and super tiny flies. And then the seeds have wings. So it's in the parsley family. And then the prairie brazoria, that whenever you find that, I think you should be super excited to find it. It is around, but often you might just walk past it. You know, if you're in a field of wildflowers, you may miss it. But Warnockia is named after the Professor Warnock, who did the wildflowers and flora of the Trans-Pecos. And I believe he died. I don't know when he died, but he wrote that book quite a while ago. And his daughter is a professor at Sul Ross also. So, and she's conservationist and an ecologist. So I think that's neat that the father and the daughter pretty much follow in the same footsteps. And the Scutellurioides is meaning it resembles skullcap. So if you were in a prairie full of skullcap and Engelmann sage and different things, you might almost miss it. So monotypic means that one it's a genus with only one species, and it is endemic to Texas. It's growing on limestone soils, and it's in the mint family. Okay. There. And then of course, Engelmann's sage. So salvia is meaning to heal, alluding to the medicinal properties, and Engelmannii is named after the German botanist. And this, I don't know, my picture, I ended up stretching it out. So it looks a little bit different than that, and maybe not so stretched out. But you can find loads of these and certain, you know, like Tandy Hills, and there's not so much at the nature center. Anywhere where there's really good expansive Fort Worth prairie habitat, you're gonna see this. Chisholm Trail Community Park in Southwest Fort Worth has some of it. And it is endemic to Texas, also to North Central Texas. Pollinated by bumblebees, solitary bees, and long-tongued butterflies. And yeah, they open all at once. It's in the mint family. And I think that this would actually be a really great landscaping plant. It's pretty hardy, woody, compact, well-behaved. So another plant that's blooming right now is the stemmy four-nerve daisy. So Tetranereus is named as Greek, meaning four. So there's another four for you. And neura meaning nerve, and scaposa for the scapes. And it's growing on limestone soils. This I took at the Nature Center. And I always have loved this view across Broadview Park at the Nature Center. And I'm trying to think where I've driven recently where it's starting to just have yellow everywhere. And it's this plant, the four-nerve daisy. And then of course here, Indian paintbrush, it's almost kind of generic plant for Texas, but actually it's one of the earlier pollinating plants. And the bracts they are not the flowers. So the red that you see is actually the bracts, so the leaves. And what I've seen recently is just bumblebees. Oh my gosh, they're like all over this plant. So I don't want to dismiss it at all, even though I think it's fairly common. in a lot of areas. So it's semi-parasitic on plants, which mostly grasses, but that's not a problem. It's not causing any harm to the grasses really. And in fact, if you were going to try to grow any of the Indian paintbrushes or any of the paintbrushes, you really need a grass. And I don't know which one, but it's just going to be more difficult to try to grow something like this from seed if you had seed, because it needs something to kind of live off of. Some of the species are concentrating selenium at high levels that could poison animals. I'm seeing it in sandy soils. It's an annual. And I had found somewhere that it might be adapted for pollination by hummingbirds. I personally have not seen a hummingbird pollinated or nectar on it, but again, like I said, bumblebees are all over this plant. So you have a couple of other species of the paintbrush, and one of them is the purple paintbrush, with the purpurea, which means purple. And of course, I forgot to mention that the genus is Castleja, which is just named after an 18th century Spanish botanist. So the purple paintbrush, you see a lot at Tandy Hills, you see it really on Fort Worth prairie soils. And then as you move kind of further north, I'm seeing a lot of the lemon paintbrush, like up by northwestern Wise County and Montague County, all up in there. Seems to be, I don't know why, but I've seen more of them there than other places. They're obligately hemiparasitic. They have green photosynthetic tissues, but they're again parasitizing on the roots of others. And like I mentioned, the purpurea is variable. Like today we saw one that was completely white. So it was just like absent of color on the bracts. And then the citrina is less variable and less abundant. So I didn't want to leave out grasses. Grasses also are flowering plants. They're wind pollinated in pretty much all cases. So buffalo grass, Bouteloua dactyloides, named after someone, Bouteloup, in the 1800s. And dacty means finger and loides, like finger-like. So it got its name from the bison herds on the short grass prairie. As you're, if you're coming from west to east, you're starting to go from short grass prairie, out in the rolling plains, you're getting less and less buffalo grass as you move further east, because you're moving into the mixed grass and then tall grass prairies. The male has the flower flag, and the female has the female is like nestled down in the base. So you have to get on your hands and knees and kind of dig around to find the female portion of the grass. It's I guess you could say excellent grazing for cattle. In some cases, if you have buffalo grass and nothing else, that might also mean overgrazing. So I think it depends on where you're at. And then the seeds and leaves are used by small mammals and birds for nesting. So Texas bluegrass, this is a really cool grass, which is blooming right now. And poas means grass in Greek, and arachnifera is spider bearing. So these long white hairs have the appearance of a spider web. From a distance, I guess they're about maybe 2 feet tall. Somewhere they're about 18 inches. And so if you see it from a distance, it's kind of wavy and just really attractive. Again, this would make a really great landscaping grass. It's a cool season grass. It's rhizomatous. So once you find a clump of it, then you'll find more of it over time if you don't have heavy grazing in that area. The male and the female flowers are on different plants. And it's in the original prairies that you have here, but of course disappearing under heavy grazing. And then the Texas grama, I always get excited to find that in the early spring. I don't know why. I think because it's just like such a nice, sweet little grass. And to me, it just looks like a bunch of little hands coming off the stem of the grass. And so it would make a good
So
plant.
Michelle, on that Texas bluegrass, I just had that identified. I've got like 3 sprigs of it in my front yard. So there's a male and a female. I was thinking of spreading the seeds, but it sounds like I need to get them together. Do
Well,
I need to introduce them to each other?
yeah, I think they'll figure it out because they pollinated by the wind. But
Well, it doesn't have
really-
very long leaves. In fact, it seemed like it was only the stem that was sticking up. So I didn't realize it was even a grass.
Yeah, and it has like that kind of bluish tinge. It does like shade everywhere where I've seen it. It's been like dappled light shade and post oak with, edges.
This is under a tree in my yard, which I didn't plant it there. So I'm excited to
Mhm.
find something that I don't have to get rid of that's in my yard.
Yes. Yeah, it's always good to know what you have for sure. So, I think it'll just spread over time as well. So you probably don't have to try to be like a matchmaker for them. Hopefully it'll just spread on its own. So I was wanting to, let me move this. Just show some places where you might find some of these plants. Let's see if I can move my little bar out of the way somewhere. So the tallbred scarf pea, Eagle Mountain Park, which is TRWD Park. And you can find foxglove there. You can find these at the nature center. You can find them at Tandy Hills. There are quite a few places in Fort Worth Prairie that you can find these plants. Hold on. Okay. Indian plantain, I've seen it there. I have a little colony of it at my house that I discovered. And then since I discovered them, they're actually spreading. So I've been, they're a sun loving plant. But in a lot of cases, they get woody encroachment. So then you might find a relic area of Indian plantain and it's telling you, hey, this area used to be sunny. And then it got invaded by woody species. The Engelmann's bladderpod, that really likes kind of prairie barren soils. The Missouri primrose definitely likes rocky limestone soils, and it's such a showy wildflower. That's one of my favorite wildflowers. And then shooting star, I know that botanists, whenever they find shooting star, they get really, really excited. Suzanne can attest to that as she has been in search of them, traveling far and wide looking for them. And the fun thing about those is that they're buzz pollinated. The false yellow foxglove, I've seen that at Eagle Mountain Park. There's also that at the nature center in a very far-flung place. The wild hyacinth. Again, the hyacinth you would just mistake to be a grass if it weren't blooming. Another place is Stella Rowan Prairie, which is on the Tarrant County Resource Connection campus and the Native Prairies Association of Texas. We have worked with the manager of Stella Rowan Prairie to ensure preservation and management, prairie management of the site. This watercolor that I have here was painted by my dear friend Scott Winterroad, and he painted it based off of a picture that I took of Stella Rowan Prairie, and he did that for the 2014 State of the Prairie Conference in Fort Worth. So here's a little bit of history. You can't read it, but basically Stella Rowan Prairie is a large track, especially nowadays for Fort Worth. And the campus now is dedicated, all of it's public land run by Tarrant County, but it's dedicated to service of the community. And in that, part of it is protecting that land, managing it for a prairie. Lotus milk vetch is there, the 2-flower milk vine, Engelman's daisy, the wine cup, of course, with the complementary mating of plant toppers. In Wise County at LBJ National Grassland, that's over 20,000 acres of prairie and woods. And the U.S. Forest Service manages that. And they're actually doing a really good job in recent years of brush removal, thinning, burning, managing for upland game birds, because if you can manage for upland game birds, then you're actually protecting and enhancing savannas and prairies. And this is just a map. LBJ National Grasslands. It's called Caddo LBJ National Grasslands because it's in two geographically different units. LBJ, which is in Wise County, and Caddo, which is over by Bonham, Texas, which is like 2.5 hours away. But it's a patchwork of ownership. So there's a lot of private land mixed in. So if you do go out to LBJ National Grasslands, it would be a good idea to get a map so you know where you're going. So, they have actually the grasslands, it's a mix of Western cross timbers, woodlands and savanna habitat, as well as Fort Worth prairie, upland, tabletop habitat. So you really get to see all different kinds of species. It's fairly diverse. So on sandy soils, green milkweed and partridge pea. And even in some hidden places that no one would even notice, you can find things like adder's tongue, which is fern, and winter grape fern, which is a fern. And the winter grape fern is separated, although it's disjunct from the known population originally of winter grape fern, was more, from the east all the way across into the Blackland Prairie. And then they didn't really have any documentation of winter grape fern kind of jumping over Fort Worth Prairie or into the cross timbers. But since then, and with iNaturalist, it's out there. It's out there. So Comanche Peak prairie clover, which is a very rare endemic Texas plant that is only known from a few places. Again, probably on private land, there are probably more of these plants, but botanists are really only getting out to public places and a few private lands. So you don't have as wide of a known range for them. And then the antelope horns, purple paintbrush, lemon paintbrush. I didn't want to ignore Arlington, so I added Southwest Nature Preserve because that's an illustration of what you might find blooming right now in the little pocket prairies in the eastern cross timbers. So Southwest Nature Preserve, a city of Arlington, it's a really, really neat open space or a park in Arlington, and it gives you a good idea of maybe what the Eastern Cross Timbers was like before it pretty much has been completely developed. I can't read what I have on that picture. Oh, nothing. That's just a picture of a scene there of a pond. You can find woodsia there. That's the fern. That's a neat little shade-loving fern. And then the Glen Rose yucca. So Glen Rose yucca, Yucca necopina, is also an endemic Texas species that's only known from a few locations. It is at the Fort Worth Nature Center, and I did a lot of fencing and data collection and seed collection and trying to keep the deer off of yucca at the nature center so that it could flower, because you use the stalk in order to differentiate, to know which yucca species it is. And they also hybridize between the different yucca species. So Southwest Nature Preserve has it, and they don't have a deer problem, I guess, because there probably aren't very many deer in the middle of Arlington. I don't know, but they don't have a problem. The wild indigo is something that's really in that sandy soil, and it's more east. So I would not expect to see this Baptisia west of I-35. I do know I think it's that Ray Roberts Lake State Park. And then Adder's Tongue, which they're actually coming up right now, emerging. Another park is Marion Sansom Park. This is in Fort Worth. It has a view across Lake Worth. It's mostly the trails there are used and maintained by a mountain bike group. And so if you do go there, you have to kind of make sure you have to be on the lookout so you don't get run over by a mountain bike. But there are little pocket prairies at this park. And I could see if we could ever kind of manage that park better, we could open up some of those pocket prairies a little bit better. But you see what historically was on there when you had fire and you didn't have woody brush encroachment. You have your very typical Fort Worth prairie indicator plant of pale yucca. So this land, I have a map here, which I can barely see. That's part of the park. But all of that area, even I think all the way to 820 over by TCC Northwest, was owned by the same family, the Samson family. So also at this park is a CCC structure overlooking Lake Worth and the dam. And then if you go down, there is just a really neat park. And then you go down, you can actually get to the shoreline of the lake. So there are, the New Jersey tea, which is a nice calcareous Fort Worth prairie soil plant, and gay feather and the pale leaf yucca. Also white rosinweed. So I've seen that there. And that is, again, another endemic North Texas species that runs basically in the Fort Worth prairie from the border of Oklahoma, then kind of down, getting into the Lampasas Cut Plains. But other than that, you're not going to find it in other parts of the state. So other places you can find wildflowers, it's just along the roadsides. You just have to drive, because TxDOT actually overall manages not mow, so that, early in the season, so that you can have some wildflowers. Yeah, roadsides. And this is one of my favorite places that I drive by, which is a cowboy church, a rural church that has a cemetery, but they actually let the wildflowers grow and they mow around their prairie. So I took a picture of their cemetery and wrote prairie, and I mailed them a postcard telling them how grateful I am that they're managing that property, so that it's for the benefit of pollinators, but it's adding beauty to everyone who passes by. It's just, I don't know, I'm just so grateful for how they manage it for part of the year. And then just, yeah, scenes. This is what you get.
What highway is that on, Michelle?
That's on FM 730 between Decatur and Boyd. And so I just drove by there today, and they haven't mowed. So and actually I'm probably going to mail them another postcard again going, thank you so much for allowing the flowers to grow so we can appreciate them. Yeah, so if you just go on 730 between Boyd and Decatur, you'll see it. It'll be on the west side of the road. And then this is on Highway 51. Let's see, south of Decatur. And it's just like this little corner that I don't know if they always don't mow it, but I think this was last year. They didn't mow it and it was amazing. It was just like the only place along the road in that area and on private property. It's the only place that has this amazing remnant of prairie species. And then when you look across the fence, it's like overgrazed or they've plowed or, and then other areas on the right of way they've mowed, adjacent landowners mow. But if they just wouldn't mow, oh my gosh, like it's such an amazing view. And I just think like what would the landscape be if we just let the landscape be, if we just didn't overmanage it. So